Yes. It can be heard, guys. Get it together.
Park City, Chinatown, Park Slope, and Coney Island. Meanwhile, funeral services were held today for the manager killed in a parking garage collapse in Lower Manhattan. They paying their last respects to Willis Ward at a church in Mount Vernon. Ward was believed to have been in a second floor office of the four-story garage with a concrete wall.
The hotel in England says the unsolved murder of council member from Sabre never been to Nicole Dallin, which was just up which further. And the age is going to be even understand she'll never get it.
No doubt, she's incredibly brave. Just months after hearing her mother gunned down this heartbroken daughter, now sharing her mother's final moments, hoping somebody out there knows something and help catch the killer. The first time was June.
What is going on?
Her dog describing what happened in her mom's life.
The rain came through her face, and then she was taking minutes to have a cough, and wake up.
Detectives spent on June 4th looking for a this week. They think it rolled about 100 feet after she shot, the food shop, and walked. And they took this
They're frustrated because the investigation as she is concerned. We're frustrated as well.
just very attached to her. After 3 months,
Theological Seminary, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. Today is another session of knowledge and nourishment. These are webinars that we put on all summer, started actually in late spring. Today we have a where you're so excited that you have chosen to join us. Guarantee that we will be done by 11 o'clock. Today, Serene is joined by David Finkhauser. You'll see me throughout the program only because David and I have been friends for over a decade. They're private. Served Parchment Farm for prison. Those who are with the biography. Serene Jones first statement.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to see you here. My name is Raphael. I'm a professor here in international career, serving as the provost, and it's really a great pleasure to welcome you here this evening. And I am especially honored collaborating with Senator
Download the Theological mobile app to sign up for text alerts and report outages.
I believe significant value not only for our campus, but for the broader community, country, and race, or the belief that a particular race is inferior or superior to another, and that certain traits are predetermined by a person's race, has existed throughout history, and certainly since the United States was founded. Racism in this country has been at the root of our darkest periods, despite the efforts of many across the generations, civil rights activists, students, soldiers, and scholars. We know that racism is pervasive.
Good evening. May I have your attention, please?
Darkness
Good evening. May I have your attention, please?
in some cases,
The senator will begin signing autographs, signing books, and greeting you all in about 5 minutes. If you'd like to have a book signed, we invite you to make a line down the center aisle. The senator will be joining us in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Today. Today is another session of knowledge and nourishment.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience. If you are we're making an adjustment. If you are looking to have a book signed by the senator, please line up on the right side of the auditorium, not the center. Please line up on the right side of the auditorium. Thank you. The senator will begin signing books in 5 minutes.
Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2.
I have requests? No. I'm kidding. Or does anybody want to say?
Got another good song? Somebody start a good song.
Yeah. That's not they used to sing here. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. You want to sing that in Spanish? Amen. Same thing. Amen.
Good evening. Please take your seats. Our evening panel will begin shortly.
This one? You got it. Go for it.
Moderator, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Adrienne. Yes, Naomi took me and brought us around. I didn't even. Now I know. Like, we're going to the back. I was like, why are we walking this way?
Back in the summer. No, you're saying Adrienne, observe.
She's like, oh yeah, we know.
Observe closely.
I give it to Thomas.
Oh, there's a girl.
He was like, I need to stay real and sign what you think.
No, it's like no. He ended on a couple who had come up from who he married. So it was just this wonderful moment.
Thomas Townsend.
But you know, I'm not a question. Not a lot. It's not. It doesn't. It's not solely that. I personally.
It's just, well, I mean, what I got from the sense of like students and like, what kind of asking these questions. I think the problem is just like, we're still like wrestling. Who's the weird that you keep saying? That's the problem. There's a movie where the two people roll a big eye. We ain't testimony service with this one.
should take the third seat. Okay, got it.
So the revised order will be Serene, then Senator, then Adriene, then
And come on over.
Tim's the one that has a real challenge.
All the way across. I've been stretching. I was wondering.
Yes.
For questions.
Yes.
I was thinking about doing the podium. Would it look all right with the empty chair there for that part?
Like, if the podium is right here, or whatever, like.
Especially to mark the kind of like, okay, our conversation is over, now we'll take questions. I think that's fine. So I think I'm gonna go to the podium when it's time for Q&A.
Right here facing the second curtain.
Oh, he's right there.
We're going to be in this chair right here by the piano, facing him.
We have a table. See, would you like me to reset that for you? We can.
Maybe it's of something else.
Take your time, sir. Take your time. I'm leaving this stuff right
They're not gonna.
They won't
see
see
that.
this?
You can leave it right there.
Oh, they want to come back and say okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bob. Wait for the books.
No, they don't want to go back there. They just really like to just congratulate and maybe after the speech. But they would just like to have just like just a little moment because they don't have the books or maybe they don't know. Is that cool if I just try to take it and send it to them? I'm kidding. No, this is actually orange. Right. So I'm thinking this time and
I did that all week.
I'm sorry, I set out a chair for you, but someone took it. Oh, very good. Oh, perfect. Very good.
Right here, then. Just like
The armor bearers are coming.
Good evening. Please take this moment to silence your portable electronic devices, and please welcome tonight's panel.
So welcome everyone. I'm Serene Jones, the president here at Union Theological Seminary, and this is a great evening. It is so wonderful to see all of you here. Wow. We are in the middle, actually this is the last event of our reunion where alums come back. It's the first time we've had reunion in 4 years because of COVID, and we can't think of a better way to celebrate the legacy of Union than to have tonight's, I'm not going to call him a guest because he's family, to a part of the Union family here with us. So I'm going to do make us do a little bit of exercise here at the start. So I want to ask those of you who are here who were either in the senator's class, or his professor, or a congregant or minister at Abyssinian, but you were part of his life when he was here at Union, just to stand up so he can see that you're here. Oh my gosh. Just before we began, I learned that Dr. Larry Rasmussen was one of the co-directors of the senator's dissertation, and you're here tonight. That's so absolutely wonderful, Larry. Thank you. So another stand-up I would like, just so everyone can see, for the faculty and students who are presently here at Union to all stand up so we can see where you are. So faculty and students and administration and board members, everyone, Union community. And we are very fortunate that in addition to being an alum, the senator also serves on our board of trustees. So how does one begin an evening like this? We're very pleased to be here together to be co-sponsoring this event with the Riverside Church. Couldn't be more apt and appropriate. I'm going to begin with a new ritual that we begin events here at Union, and that is with our land acknowledgement. Union Theological Seminary acknowledges and honors the land on which this building stands as the homeland and territory of the Lenape people, as well as the habitat and dwelling place of the many beings they have been in relationship with. We give thanks to all the spirits of nature, and we pay respect to the Lenape people past, present, and future, and express support for the flourishing of indigenous people and lifeways within this place and everywhere. So this evening we are going to have a wonderful conversation that will be launched by some comments from the senator. He needs no introduction, but I can say a few things that everyone knows. He is the senior pastor of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. He has been at the forefront of addressing so many issues: mass incarceration, health care equity, voting rights, among many other pressing issues. He holds degrees from Morehouse College. I should pause and say, who are the Morehouse people in the room? You know, that you kind of get in trouble if you don't do that. There we go, there we go, there we go. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to say spell house. So let's do a bigger stand up again, spell house. Spellman too, there we go. Yes, yes. Yes. So he is the author of many books, including The Divided Mind of the Black Church. He published his life journey in a book that you all have just had signed, A Way Out of No Way. And in 2023, just recently, he released a children's book entitled Put Your Shoes On and Get Ready. Wow, what a great. It's based on his life lessons and lessons he learned from his father. And last but not least, by the way, in January of 2021, he became Georgia's first black senator. And And I should say, also add to this, and this is both an honor to be part of this and yet a very sad commentary. He is one of only 11 black senators in American history. So welcome, Senator Warnock. We are so happy to have you here. He graduated from Union in 1994 with an MDiv and 2006 with a PhD. He has many memories of this place, and those memories are recounted poignantly and powerfully in his memoir, and I think we'll be hearing some of those, and then we'll have a conversation. I'm very happy to introduce our moderator for this evening, the Reverend Dr. Timothy Adkins-Jones, who is the senior pastor at the historic I'm now getting my notes here in the right order. Who at the historic Bethany Baptist Church in Newark. He is also the professor of homiletics here at Union Theological Seminary, teaching our students how to preach. He has a PhD from Boston College, and Boston University, and we are very lucky and happy to have you on this faculty. So thank you, Tim. And then we're very happy to be joined by the brand new pastor of the Riverside Church, the Reverend Adriene Thorne. She is the 8th senior minister, wow, of the historic Riverside Church in the city of New York, and the first African-American woman to hold that position. Adriene, wow. Prior to leading Riverside, Adriene served at First Presbyterian Church of Brooklyn for 6 years, where she co-founded the award-winning Brooklyn Heights Community Fridge, and where the community named her one of the 10 most impactful people. There's so much more I could say about everyone here, but let's get down to business. And Senator, I turn the microphone over to you.
Well, hello, everybody. This is how you know I'm Baptist. Let the church say amen. It's wonderful to be here. I am really just delighted to be back at Union. I've been wanting to come back to do this for a while, and that has taken a little while is not the fault of the president or any lack of trying on her part. And the entire staff. One of the things I seem to have given up over the last 3 years is control over my own schedule and much of my own life. But it is a labor of love. And I feel deeply called to the work that I'm privileged to do. And I'm humbled by it. I'm in politics, but I'm not in love with politics. I'm in love with change. I put up with politics. Because every now and then, I'm enabled because of what the people of Georgia did for me. In the words of the old spiritual, they changed my name. And because of that, I tolerate politics because every now and then I'm able to do something amazing along with others, like flip the United States Senate. Without which we would not have passed the American Rescue Plan, which responded to the pandemic, but also, among many other things, among several things, huge bill. And it's easy to get lost on some of the enormity of it all because we're all so drained by the pandemic. We all have PTSD. We're all navigating the trauma of the last few years. But among several things, that piece of legislation included something called the expanded child tax credit. I lament that we only did it for 6 months. But I'm going to keep fighting until we make it permanent because it literally cuts child poverty 50%. Every now and then, I put up with politics because every now and then I'm able to do something I didn't know I'd be able to do, like get disadvantaged and economically advantaged farmers about $5 billion in debt relief. And confirmed to the Supreme Court a justice named Ketanji Brown Jackson. We have a Supreme Court justice, y'all, named Ketanji. She's got other names, but just stop right there. And I didn't plan to say this, but I do remember the day we confirmed her. The chamber was full, which is unusual. Usually when we're talking, there's nobody in there, which is hard on a Baptist preacher because I'm used to it. But the day we confirmed her, the chamber was full. I was standing near the chair of the presiding officer waiting on the vote to open. I was chatting with my friend and colleague Cory Booker. The two of us were chatting with the vice president who was sitting in the chair. And she said, "You know, guys, this is a historic moment." We said, "Yeah, quite a moment." She said, "You ought to take a moment and write a letter to somebody who comes to mind in a moment like this." She suggested that to us the way black women in my life make suggestions. You understand. And then she handed two United States senators each a piece of paper. But it wasn't just any sheet of paper, it was the letterhead of the Vice President of the United States. And I sat down and I wrote a letter. I knew immediately who I'd write it to because the only job I like more than being Georgia's United States Senator and Ebenezer's pastor, where I still preach. My favorite job is dad to 6-year-old Chloe and 4-year-old Caleb. And I sat down and I wrote a letter. I said, "Dear Chloe, today we confirm to the Supreme Court Ketanji Brown Jackson. In the long history of our nation, she is the first Supreme Court justice who looks like you with hair like yours." While we were confirming her, a friend of mine, the vice president, suggested that I write a letter. By the way, she, in the long history of our country, is the first vice president who looks like you with hair like yours. I write to say that in America, you can achieve and become anything you set your head and your heart to do. Love, Dad. She was not impressed. When I read that letter to her, she said, "Can I go out and play now?" But that's what it means to be a parent. She doesn't get it now, she'll understand it later, but I do this work because every time I get a chance to write a piece of legislation, co-sponsor a piece of legislation, block some nonsense of a piece of legislation, for me it's a letter to my children and to all of our children. And I think about my own parents. My own parents who set me on the path which led to Union, which led to Ebenezer, which led to the Senate. Neither of my parents are college graduates. My dad was a preacher, but like a lot of black men of that era, born in 1917, trained in a kind of apprenticeship model, my dad was a preacher and a junk man. He loaded old junk cars on the back of a rig that he designed himself, and that's how he paid for his family's needs. He took care of his family by loading broken cars on the back of a truck. And then on Sunday morning, he took off his dirty clothes and put on his work clothes. And the man who spent all week picking up broken cars would then, with his words, pick up broken people, convince them of their value, the treasure in what others see as trash, that our God is a kind of junk man or junk woman who goes around picking up people that other people have thrown away. And it is through that hermeneutical lens of my father and of my mother, who grew up in Waycross, Georgia, younger than him. She grew up in the 1950s, picking somebody else's tobacco and somebody else's cotton. But in 2021, the octogenarian hands that picked somebody else's cotton and picked somebody else's tobacco got to pick her youngest son to be a United States Senator. They poured so much into me, and through the lens of their own lives, I came to Union with a hermeneutic that was then sharpened and deepened by my experience here. And can I share a little bit about my time at Union? All right. So I'm going to read from my book a little bit. Is that okay? So I'm going to read the chapter on my time at Union. It's chapter 4. It's called The New York State of Mind. I'll read just a little bit. I know we sold some books. If you don't have it already, you can find it on Amazon.com. $28. Let me read a little bit. I'm going to start right where we are. In my first days at Union, the seminary held a chapel service to bring together the new students and faculty. As we were leaving James Memorial Chapel, I bumped into Dr. Cone, and he introduced himself. Hello. I'm James Cone. Those of us who were students understand. I responded in kind, I know who you are. I said, explaining that I had first encountered his work as a high school student and budding young minister. Through the years, I took several courses he took, including Introduction to Theology in my first semester. When I turned in one of my first assignments in his class, he wrote on the top of my paper, "You have the ability to do doctoral work." His note affirmed and acknowledged my potential as a scholar, which was significant to me because he was known as a rigorous taskmaster. Students warned that he put more books on this syllabus than any other professor. But we also knew that he held the same high expectations of us that he did for himself. He was a very disciplined man who jogged 5 miles a day and read and wrote 8 hours a day, except on Sundays. He strengthened my ability to think more deeply and to interrogate my faith and what that means to struggle as a Christian in the quest for justice. My classmates and peers at Union have been among the smartest people I have ever known. And our frustration and criticism of the church came from a place of deep love for the church, its mission, and its promise. But we were not always serious. I didn't have a computer the first year, showing my age. And a friend from that inner circle, Joanne Terrell, allowed me to type my papers on her computer in her apartment. She was in the first year of the doctoral program, and we often critiqued each other's work. We also told jokes. One day, she and I were walking down Hastings Hall with another friend when I broke into a spontaneous rendition of the old Negro spiritual, "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." After the chorus, I took the lead on the solo verse, singing, "I looked over Jordan, and what did I see?" You know, call and response. A little old lady cooking black-eyed peas. Joanne fell out laughing. I caught her off guard by swapping the line about a band of angels coming after me with my own playful lyrics, signifying the common culinary delights of Southern soul food as eschatological. That is, out of this world. Union was a great place for all kinds of diversity: white, black, gay, straight, and foreign students from all over the globe, including South Africans whose homeland was emerging from the grip of apartheid. Coming from a conservative Pentecostal background, I'd accepted the teachings of the church that homosexuality was a sin. All my life, I'd heard preachers point to the Bible to tell the story of how God had destroyed the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah because of the prevalence of sin, which had long been interpreted as homosexuality. My mind had begun to open as a student at Morehouse, but my evolution on the issue accelerated at Union, as I was given the tools to look at the scriptures and the reading of scriptures critically, systematically, and within historical context. Faith is both a divine and human undertaking. That's why white slave owners, for example, had once used the Bible to justify slavery. Yet our African-American ancestors knew in their bones that God did not intend for them to be slaves. The late great theologian Howard Thurman often told the story of his grandmother, a former slave and devout Christian who had never learned to read, but loved hearing him read to her from the Bible, except the writings attributed to Paul the Apostle. Because of her experience, she didn't want to hear anything from Paul. When Thurman finally asked her why, she told him that the master's white preacher, who occasionally held a service for the enslaved, always chose to focus on select biblical writings, particularly verses like the Deutero-Pauline passage that reads, "Slaves, be obedient to them that are your masters, as unto Christ." The spirituals and the Black freedom movement are expressions of the myriad ways in which slaves like Thurman's grandmother clearly turned from that Ephesians text to Exodus, where God told Moses to tell Pharaoh to let my people go. They knew something the slave masters did not know. Their faith was a freedom faith. Gay, lesbian, and transgender folk live inside an experience that others do not. I don't know what it's like to have that part of your identity declared anathema, no matter how you live it out. But Union introduced me to a fellowship of thinkers and disciples whose lives challenged me and changed me. It's really the conversion experience that comes from walking with people. While Union expanded my mind, Abyssinian, where I served, showed me how to put my faith into action in the world around me. In the early 1990s, New York City was hot with racial tension, still bubbling over from a spate of racially motivated attacks and killings during the 1980s. When I arrived in the city, New Yorkers were still protesting the murder of Yusuf Hawkins, a 16-year-old black teenager who was shot to death in the Bensonhurst neighborhood of Brooklyn on August 23, 1989. Yusuf and 3 friends had gone there that evening to check out a used car when they were accosted by a group of about 30 youths, all but one of whom were white, and some of whom wielded baseball bats. During the attack, Yusuf was shot twice in the chest. There have been other racially motivated killings. Willie Turks, the 34-year-old black Metropolitan Transportation Authority worker, who was pulled from a car by a white mob and beaten and stomped to death in 1982. Eleanor Bumpers, a 66-year-old mentally disturbed black woman, shot to death by police as they tried to evict her from her home in October 1984. And Michael Griffith, a 23-year-old black man who, along with his friend, was attacked by a white mob outside a pizza parlor and chased onto a highway where he was fatally shot by a passing car in an area of Queens called Howard Beach. When Spike Lee's movie, Do the Right Thing, hit the screen in 1989, exploring the racial tension in a Brooklyn neighborhood, Bed-Stuy, between its African-American residents and the Italian-American owner of a local pizzeria, and ending with the killing of an unarmed black man by the police. This was art imitating life in its rawest form. Black men seemed in peril. They had been marginalized by society and targeted by police. Mass incarceration had begun to siphon scores of them from their communities, so they were missing from their families. A generation of children was growing up fatherless or visiting their daddies in jail, perhaps even presuming that life would land them there too. And then, in 1999, a police shooting would rock New York City. On February 4th of that year, 4 New York City police officers in plain clothes shot a black man, a 23-year-old Ghanaian immigrant named Amadou Diallo, at about 12:40 a.m. in the vestibule of his own apartment building in the Bronx. The officers later said they mistook him for a serial rape suspect who had last struck about a year prior and thought he was going for a gun when he reached into his pocket. The officers fired 41 shots, striking Diallo 19 times. He had no weapon. He was trying to pull out his wallet. Just a year and a half before that, in August 1997, a 31-year-old Haitian immigrant named Abner Louima had been arrested outside a Brooklyn nightclub and then taken to a police precinct where he was brutally beaten and sodomized with a broken broomstick or the handle of a toilet plunger. The attack left injuries so severe that Louima needed multiple corrective surgeries. New Yorkers took to the streets, with demonstrators marching to City Hall and the precinct where the torture had taken place. Before the officers even went to trial in the Louima case, Diallo was shot. Before the officers even went to trial in the Louima case, Diallo was shot. The shooting was like lighter fluid tossed into a burning flame. Once again, the city exploded. Outraged New Yorkers poured back into the city streets daily and in recurring waves made their way to one police plaza in downtown Manhattan, where they crossed a threshold that assured their arrest. And there were droves of arrests. As I watched the protests, something inside me clicked this time. I knew I had to go. It wasn't just that Diallo looked like me, but seeing his merciless killing after all the other incidents underscored the vulnerability of navigating the world in black skin. He could have been me. I could have been him. He was just a hardworking young black man saving up money to go to college. I hurt for his heartbroken mother, who had watched her son travel to America with such hope. I hurt for his interrupted dreams and for my people whose skin alone made us such targets of hatred and violence. Some of my seminary classmates were feeling the same. At least one of them, the Reverend Anthony Lee, now a Maryland-based pastor, was snatched and thrown against a gate by 4 plainclothes police officers who bolted from a rickety-looking car and ran toward him one cold winter night as he was walking back to the seminary. Not knowing whether the men were officers or muggers, he decided that it was best not to run. In a very tense moment, as they were frisking him, one officer yelled, "Gun!" although he was unarmed. Seeing his life flash before him, he said, "I am a student at Union Theological Seminary. My ID is in my front pocket." After everything checked out, the officer advised, "Don't act so nervous the next time." Given what was happening around us and sometimes to us, it didn't make much sense for us to be talking about justice in the classroom and singing about it in the church if we weren't willing to get in the struggle in the streets. So I gathered up a small group, and we took the subway as close we could and walked the rest of the way to the precinct. Throngs of others were already there, some with signs calling for justice. As one group of protesters crossed the line of demarcation, were handcuffed and were put in the back of a police van, the next group stepped up. My group just flowed with the crowd, moving closer to the line and our eventual arrest. I'd never been arrested before, but I knew without a doubt that I was doing the right thing, that this was my time to get in the fight, to put my body in the game, to participate in the civil disobedience that I had heretofore just read about or witnessed from afar. Finally, I was handcuffed and led to the back of a police van. Congressman Elliot Engel, who represented part of the Bronx, was in the van, as was the Reverend Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, who was teaching at that time at Columbia. We were all transported to the precinct, processed, and released. There was cautious hope in the community that the protests would push the then mayor, Rudolph Giuliani, past the arrogance he had displayed to citizens' previous complaints about police brutality and racism and the need to address them. The police commissioner, Howard Safer, had not suspended the 4 officers involved. and in his one-year tenure, Safer had shown little interest in addressing police brutality. This is 1999. A Bronx grand jury indicted the officers on charges of second-degree murder, but after an appeals judge ordered a change of venue to Albany, the state capital, because of public clamor, a jury of 4 black and 8 white jurors acquitted the officers of all charges, and any hope that our outrage and protests might prompt meaningful change was further dashed when an internal New York Police Department investigation found that the officers did not merit any disciplinary action since they had not violated department guidelines. The outcome was disheartening, but I was forever changed. I brought my ministry to the streets, and there was no turning back.
One more time for Senator Warnock. Amen. So grateful for your time and so grateful for this opportunity to share, and absolutely grateful to be able to co-host this event with our friends across the street at Riverside. And so to respond first to the Senator's remarks, I'm going to ask if Reverend Thorne might offer her remarks and then the question.
So I'm really grateful that you brought into the room Eleanor Bumpers, Amadou Diallo, and the protest work that you and the students here at Union did. And I'm thinking about Union students, theological students. I'm thinking about our young people in their schools afraid of what's going to happen to them. And all of that story, that the great history of Union is in the room. But there were 2 themes in your book that you also brought into the room at the very start that were meaningful for me. One was community and one was joy. So even when you started, you mentioned Judge Ketanji and Vice President Kamala and Senator Corey, and then you tell the joke about the Black-Eyed Peas. So even though your book is holding these really heavy, really painful stories about transformation and your ministry going to the street, there's this thread of community and there's this thread of joy. And I really am hoping you might say something to the young people, to the theological students, and to those of us in the church about the importance of community in your church, in your ministry, in the Senate, but also the importance of joy.
Wonderful. You said a lot already. Listen to the pastor.
Amen. Amen.
Don't take yourself too seriously.
Amen.
That's part of it. Don't take yourself too seriously. And I think that's important, particularly if you're going to do this work, this justice-centered work. And to laugh in the midst of struggle signifies a kind of faith. It's not trivial at all. It is the recognition that I'm part of this project, but it's larger than me. After all, there were other folk working on this long before I showed up. And while I'm busy saying there's never been a time like this, these are the worst times ever, it reminds you of that meeting they said they had in heaven, and the guy wanted to tell somebody about the flood of 1859 or whenever it was, and somebody said, before you go into it, Noah's in the audience. Laughter is important. Walter Kerr, the critic, theater critic, said that laughter is not the gaiety of things, it is the groan made gay. And I think that's deep in black spirituality. The blues and the spirituals that James Cone talked about, and the laughter and the comedians and the ways in which Richard Pryor in another time, in his own bawdy way, turned the ugliness on its head. It was something subversive that our comedians have done. And so, I don't know, that's always been with me. It's not anything I had to think about, honestly, a long time. You reflect on it later. Union taught me how to reflect on things. But there was always laughter in my house. I'm one of 12 children in my family, and laughter was just part of our house. And you had to have a sense of humor and thick skin to make it in my house. It wasn't cruel, it was love. But you couldn't be thin-skinned. And I tell this story in my book, just about how important laughter was. And I grew up in the Pentecostal church. And, we believe in the laying on of hands and the presence of the Spirit and movement and power in that moment. And I grew up watching some of the preachers on television. And one day, I knew early on the impulse to preach and the lead was already there. And one day after I preached one of my sermons at age 6 or 7 in the house, just carrying on, I told my older brother, several years older than me, that I was going to pray, just spontaneously, I put my hand on his head. And, he bowed his head because that's what we would do. And I said, the Lord is going to give you a new face. He knew he had been had. You had to have thick skin to get through my house. But no, the joy is a big part of it. And we certainly need laughter in moments like this. And the work that all of us who are involved in the work of change is slow, is hard. I mean, you're listening to me read about this. I was a student here in 1999, saying in our own way then, Black Lives Matter, before folk were saying Black Lives Matter. And prior to that, Rodney King in 1991. So that's 1991. So there's a whole generation of young adults in their 30s who don't even remember that. And they're still fighting these battles. So I think there's something to be said about staying in the fight, but there's also something to be said about being a happy warrior. Finally, one of the last memories we have of John Lewis. Yesterday I met Pharrell. That was so cool. I feel real cool. I have a picture with Pharrell. But I told him that one of my most amazing, one of my favorite memories of John Lewis was toward the end of his life. I don't know if you remember the video that went viral. One of his staffers was playing I'm Happy, Pharrell's Happy, and John Lewis is dancing and carrying on. We played it at his funeral. If John Lewis could dance and laugh and smile, who am I?
Senator Warnock, if you would allow me a bit of pastoral privilege, as it were, to ask a question myself. You are uniquely positioned as a torchbearer for many traditions and legacies, considering where you pastor, the institutions that you've named, that you've been a part of, and the figures that you so readily claim for inspiration. And so you also stand quite squarely in the tradition of black clergy person become politician, a tradition that goes all the way back to Hiram Rhodes Revels, an AME preacher who was the first black person to hold congressional office, that has carried through the likes of Bobby Lee Rush and Harlem and Abyssinian's own Adam Clayton Powell Jr. and many others. My question, staying in the sort of theological lane, is how do you manage the seeming tension between these positions? How do you maintain the prophetic fire that comes from the pastoral office, yet live in the seeming unyielding compromise that comes with politics? Do you find yourself having to compromise? And what ultimately guides your ethics as you navigate the rough waters between these two roles? I teach at the Union Theological Seminary.
How do I manage to hold these things in tension and remain faithful? I'll tell you when I'm done. That's the short answer. Part of how you do it is to keep asking yourself that question. You got a shot at getting it right if you keep struggling with that question. But if I ever get to a point where I'm not wrestling with that question, then I'm in trouble. So you just asked me the question, but it is something I'm wrestling with all the time. And it is the reason why, and I detail it in the book, it's the reason why the decision finally to run was after much prayer, much reflection. You know, a lot of call stories to ministry, people talk about running and eventually giving. I don't have that story when it comes to leadership in the parish. I embrace that right away. But the decision to enter into politics as an extension of that ministry, I said yes to running for the Senate after being asked 3 times, 3 different occasions. And part of what I was wrestling with was that very question. Yes. How do you maintain your prophetic edge? Is this truly authentic to what I feel called to do ultimately? Or is it an abnegation of that basic commitment? So I think, number one, if you keep wrestling with it, you got a shot. 2, I don't, you know, as long as I can wear the office as a kind of loose garment, I've got a shot. If I ever get to the point where it's the office that matters, then yeah, then you're in trouble. And while I enjoy being a United States Senator, it's amazing the things that I get to do that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise, for others. I'm just not willing to have this office at any cost. Certainly not the cost of my soul or my conscience. There's no shortage of transactional politicians. And so if I'm just going to be a transactional politician, there's no point in the pastor doing this. I often say that I'm not a senator who used to be a pastor. I'm a pastor in the Senate. Right. But even for those who don't feel called to ministry, I think part of what deeply ails our politics is that the politics is too much about the politicians. It's about them, and even the way it's covered, it's so annoying. The way it's covered in media is about who's up, who's down, who's in, who's out. Who cares? I mean, that's not what the people at home are wrestling with. They want to know who's going to help them and help their families and give them a path that leads to human thriving and possibility. So for me, I feel like in January of 2021, I just picked up another tool, but my project has changed. Yeah. And to the degree that this tool is useful, I'll use it. If that changes, I'll pick up something else.
Amen. Thank you, sir. Amen. I almost told you to watch your voice on that, Reverend. You started. I felt it coming, but amen, amen. President Jones, how might you have a question for the Senator?
So this is a sort of strange question. It's a theological question, and I thought, perhaps one of the things you get to do at a place like this is actually ponder theological things. So when we spoke with you on a Zoom call back in February, I asked you the question, what advice would you give to Union students now? And you reflected on how much you loved the quiet time in the library and how you now never have quiet time and you never have time to be alone. There's no space for silence, and how precious that is in our lives. So this is an odd question, but do you have a way of thinking about the role that silence could possibly also play in our political life? Silence is a theological, you're just talking about how it's all about the politicians and not about the issues, but the very thing you're talking about that you're missing that allows you to be human, if that's absence from our understanding of our political existence, what are the theological consequences of that, and how might we reimagine that?
No, it's a great question. I do have some time, because it would be wholly impossible if I didn't have any. I still write sermons every week. But yeah, part of what I miss the most, and I'm, is the amount of time that people like me and people like you enjoy alone. And yeah, there's too much chatter in our culture. Not just in politics, just in general. It's just it's the culture of idle chatter on way too many platforms, constantly, all the time. How many of you, raise your hand if you remember when television used to go off? Explain it to the millennials. They used to play the Star Spangled Banner, and then television went off. In fact, there's an old R&B song where Lenny lost his woman, and he's so heartbroken, and he's trying to find some relief. And as he describes that moment of heartbreak, he says, I watched television till television went off. Ask the R&B folk, But yeah, there's a lot of chatter. And the church has been pulled into it. The church has been seduced and has bought into it. We need some more silent moments in our churches and in our ministries, and the recognition by pastors and leaders that we don't have all the answers. We've been busy being an interlocutor in this incessant conversation that's going on. We've been pulled into it. And that may be why the most prominent and well-financed Christian voices in America have taken a terrible turn and have been wholly co-opted and have lost credibility. They haven't even been consistent with what they said was important 20 years ago. Like, I remember a lot of us were frustrated, right? When we would point to poverty and a whole range of other issues, and they were so focused on sort of narrow focus, issues, one or two issues around human sexuality, and that's what really matters, and that's what's destroying the world. And then they endorsed Donald Trump. So, Yeah, the answer is yes. I think we need some more quiet time, and because what cripples us and what cripples our politics is a deep spiritual malaise. And the other thing that I learned here at Union, or got words for, all of us who are, as Americans, we sit on top of most of the world anyway. So part of what privileged people need to do, and we're all privileged in different ways, is to be silent so we can hear the voices of marginalized people and marginalized cultures. And also so that we can hear the sermon being preached right now through this crazy weather. We need to listen to the silent sermon of a suffering earth so that we can be healed.
Before we turn to the audience, I have one more. I've been accosted by some of your Morehouse brethren, and so I have a question.
You can always tell a Morehouse man, you can't tell him much.
I've been told. I didn't have that honor, amen, but on behalf of at least a couple of them, in your book, and actually you quoted some of this as you were reading earlier, in your book you discuss your journey through Morehouse, Union, Abyssinian, a very unique and distinct tradition, particularly when they are put all together. We know that Dr. Butts also was a significant influence in your life. And so could you speak just a moment about this tradition or these traditions and how the amalgamation of them, including the influence of Dr. Butts, has informed and shaped your work in ministry?
Well, thank you so much. And let me say what I intended to say during my remarks, my opening remarks. Welcome and congratulations to all the classes that are in your reunion. Give yourselves a round of applause, all the alum who are here. Yes, so when I was a student here, MDiv and then PhD, all the way through all my degrees here, I had this running train between Union and Abyssinian, between Morningside Heights and Harlem. Athanasius asked, what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? I lived in that intersection between Athens and Jerusalem, between Union and Abyssinian, ivory towers and ebony trenches. And it is that experience through most of the 90s that has shaped my ministry. And it's part of the reason why I chose Union over Harvard. I wanted to be in this particular kind of metropolitan environment. And there is, as you point out, a grand tradition within Union of Morehouse men who have come, Morehouse students who've come to Union, and I'm proud to be a part of that. Part of what those two schools have in common is a history of, built into the DNA is this commitment to social change and the work of social change. Gary Dorian has written about it as he talks about the black social gospel. Dorian, who was one of the advisors for my thesis. Good to see Dr. Rasmussen, who advised my master's thesis on King and Bonhoeffer. But there is that tradition that these schools, Benjamin Elijah Mays said that over the heads of her students, Morehouse holds a crown that she challenges them to grow tall enough to wear. This sense that you will make a difference in the world. It's the tradition of Mays and King and Mordecai Wyatt Johnson and Howard Thurman and Julian Bond and so many others. and Calvin Butts. Lastly, let me just say, if you're wondering, well, how did he pull this off? How did he manage the politics and the careful dance of running for the United States Senate in Georgia and won 5 times? But who's counting? If you count all the primaries, 5 times. And how does he navigate the politics of the Senate and moving between the church in Atlanta and the Senate in D.C.? Well, while I was here, I pulled off something, and I didn't think about it until years after I left. I was somewhere between 2 incredibly brilliant and generative and magnanimous mentors who were not always easy. I negotiated being James Cone's student and Calvin Butts, while serving on Calvin Butts' staff. You all don't understand. That's a lot to manage. Because they both had a very healthy sense of their mission and call in the world. And it's something to manage just one of them. I had them both at the same time for years. And God bless their memories. What incredible souls. Incredible. Incredible souls. James Cone gave me the great honor. He asked me 3 years before he died to deliver his eulogy. I was wondering why he was telling me this. He said, I've already told my family. So as if he knew something we didn't know. I spoke a few months ago. I was 3 days from my election, the general, before we ended up going into a runoff. And it was an election I had to win for Georgia. But even though the election was Tuesday, Dr. Butt's funeral was that Friday, I told my team I'm going to New York. Because he hired me 2 weeks after I came here. I was on his staff the whole time. And he taught me how to take my ministry to the streets. But I'm able to do the things that I'm able to do politically because I have sharpened my skills of diplomacy. Because I survived Calvin Butts and James Cone.
Amen. Thank you. We have a little time now for some questions from the audience. Paula is walking with a microphone and will give some instructions.
Please raise up a hand and we'll try and get around to you, as many of you as we can.
Hello, my name is Lydia, and I am a student at Adelphi University. I am a major in political science, and like you, I feel called to politics because of issues. One thing that really struck me in past elections was just how much evangelicals have skewed towards Republicans. Even in 2022, a majority of evangelical voters voted for Herschel Walker, and he wasn't the one who was a pastor at a church. What I want to know is, what advice do you have to the Democrats to winning over communities of faith?
Stop ceding the faith and values lane to the right. Really. I mean, especially since they're wrong most of the time. They're certainly wrong about the gospel. Why would we cede the faith and value space? to folks who in my state would leave 600,000 Georgians in the health care coverage gap because they're still fighting Obamacare that's been the law of the land for 10 years. People are literally dying because they won't expand Medicaid in Georgia. I said during the debates, my first election, as they were trying to make me into a Marxist and tie me to Castro, whom I've never met. I said, you want to know who I am? I'm a Matthew 25 Christian. That's who I am. You don't have to look far. That's what I am. I was hungry and you fed me. I was in prison. I was sick. You came to visit me. I needed water. You gave me something to drink. I was an alien, foreigner. You invited me. Well, you got all this hateful anti-immigrant policies. I mean, they're so wrong about the gospel. So those of us who are on the left and are people of faith, we need to own our faith. And stop being so reticent about it. And I think my example and experience shows that when people on the left do it, it kind of leaves them disoriented. Because there is this kind of framework that's been created that the left is somehow anti-God, atheistic, whatever it is, wholly secular, nothing else, and all Christians are Republicans. In fact, so the other day, my team, we decided to, I did an interview, I don't know when it's going to run, I actually did an interview on, what is it called? CBN. See, I'm at Union, y'all don't even know what that is. The Christian Broadcasting Network, where Jerry Falwell is. I went there. Take it to them. And we'll see what they do with my interview, but that's the other thing you learn. But I thought it was important for me to talk to people in that space. And I remember one, he asked me a lot of questions in the interview. He really wanted to talk to me. He felt like, let's hear from this guy. He's pastor. So I don't remember everything he asked me, and I don't know how well I did as I reflect on it. I guess it came out okay. But he asked me, what would I say to the folks, who'd be watching, who say, well, we look at your stance on abortion, and why should we even believe you're a Christian? And I told him that my stance on reproductive choice is not in spite of being a Christian, it's because I'm a Christian. And for me, as a matter of public policy, the question is not how do you feel about abortion. This is really a policy question. It's a question about your philosophy about government. What do you think is the appropriate role of the state? That's really the question, not what you think about abortion. What do you think is the appropriate role of the state? But the more important thing I said to him, and I had to find a nice way to say it because I try to be nice, and I'm trying to have a conversation with people. I said we can talk about issues, but I'm not going to sit here and defend my Christian identity. Think about that. The whole premise is wrong-headed. That I should have to defend my Christian identity to the questioner presupposes that you're the arbiter
of Christian identity.
Of Christian identity. Newsflash, you're not. And what I didn't say, because I was trying to be nice, is it's particularly ironic that this question would come from a sector of our electorate that in the name of God has embrace Trump as your Messiah. You know, I didn't say that there, but that side of me that's from Caton Homes housing projects in Savannah, Georgia, was like, y'all got a lot of nerve. They asked me to defend my Christian identity, defend yours. So anyway, listen, own your faith and speak from it. And you can do that in an effective and powerful way without it being triumphalistic.
Mr. Senator, do you have time for one more question?
I do.
Thank you for coming here. It's a pleasure to have you. And my question is, as evident from 2016 to now 2022, we've seen a lot of people infuse their faith with hatred in many of the policies, many of the elections, and just in their life in general. And as a man of faith, how would you go about communicating with these people? How would you go about communicating with people that have infused hatred along with faith?
I think you have to not simply speak about love, but embody it. Embody it and bear witness to God's love and truth in the world. And I still do believe that love is the most powerful force in the universe. I do. And here's how you have grace while you're in the fight. More and more, I think that the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is fear. I think the biblical writer's on to something in that text where it says, perfect love casts out all fear. Fear is what drives hate. People are worried about their place in the world. And that's why we're seeing this reemergence of this kind of unabashed, unembarrassed bigotry. I mean, part of what people in my generation inherited because of the sacrifices of Dr. King and Fannie Lou Hamer and those who marched alongside them is that they at least created a culture and an environment where it was socially unacceptable to just be outright vitriolic and racist. You know, the worst, people at least would be embarrassed, right? And now, in the last, since 2016, we're seeing this, you know, the sad thing is that as a black man, you know, I'm accustomed to respectable racism.
Yes, sir. From the South.
That's that joy you're talking about.
Yeah, it's from the South. Yes, sir.
You know, I'm accustomed to respectable race. You know, it's kind of low grade, it's kind of there. But where do these people come from? This kind of the folk who wear it on their sleeve down in Florida and other places, proud of it. You know, I mean, literally trying to shout from the top of their lungs, this is who I am. So, I just try to keep bearing witness to love, even for those who are spewing ugliness and vitriol. And I always try to leave a path open, and I learned this as a pastor. This might be helpful to the pastor. I'm 18 years in. Sometimes there are folk in my church who I know, but they don't know that I know where they are with respect to me and whatever I was doing or they thought I was doing or trying to do. And eventually, you know, they may come around and they act as if nothing ever happened, that they weren't out there doing whatever they were doing. And I act like I didn't know either. Like, it's called grace. Just, I mean, it doesn't matter. Just the path is there. So I think, and those are people you love who are in your family. I think you got to give your adversary a path, right? So let me end in this way, since you all invited the senator, I guess, pastor senator. People often ask me, what's the most surprising thing that happened to me since I went to the Senate? One of the most surprising things that's happened to me since I've been in the Senate, listen, is something, listen, you're, no, please be, sir, please be seated. Thank you very much. And I will answer as soon as I'm done. As soon as I'm done, I will answer. Please be seated. Thank you. So, one of the expressions of love is respect. So let me say, one of the things that surprised me the most about coming to the U.S. Senate is something called the Warnock-Cruz Amendment. This is why you know, yeah, Warnock, yeah, him, Ted Cruz. So Ted Cruz and I are both on the Commerce Committee. And most of the time when he's talking, I'm saying to myself, really? You put on a suit to come here and say that? But one day, as it turns out, there was something that Cruz wanted to do that I also wanted to do. Yeah. And we couldn't get it done in committee, so we had to take it to the floor of the Senate because of the rules of the Senate. We had to take it to the floor of the Senate the night we passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And so Ted Cruz stood up and he began to argue, we each had 2 minutes, about why his colleagues should adopt the Warnock-Cruz Amendment and why he thought we should do this. And then it came my turn and I stood up on my side of the aisle and I began to argue about why I thought we should do this. And then I closed with words I never imagined hearing myself say. I said, in closing, Mr. President, I would like to associate myself, long pause, with the words of the senator from Texas. And Twitter lit up and they said, what in the world? And people were wondering, what could Raphael Warnock and Ted Cruz be working on together? It's very simple. In Texas, there's this interstate called I-14. Right now, it's only 25 miles long. He wants to build it out. As it turns out, the same road that runs through Texas also runs through Georgia. It runs through blue districts and red districts. It runs through affluent communities and poor communities. And if we get the road built out in Texas, we'll get the road built out in Georgia. If we build it out in Georgia, we'll build it out in Texas. And some of the folk who get on that road, some will be going to churches, some will be going to mosques, some will be going to temples, but they all get to get on the same road. Nobody will ask, are you a Democrat or a Republican, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice. You can all get on the road. If we build out the road, if we make it wide enough and long enough, all of God's children can get to where they need to go. So There's a road that runs through our humanity. Ted Cruz and I, the next day, we fought about some other stuff. So I'm not preaching some cotton candy, milk toast. No, we fought the next day, the day after that. But no matter what your question, your issue is, there's a road that runs through our humanity that's deeper than the fights of this moment, that's deeper than red and blue. And our job is to build a road out that connects our humanity, that leads to what Dr. King called beloved community. That's my project. And I promised this brother, if he sat down, I'd give him a chance to ask this question. And I will. Yes, sir.
Here I come. Here I come. Can I hold it? Can I hold it? All right. I'll stand out, yeah. Thank you, Senator Warnock, for giving me the opportunity to ask this question. I was really moved by the passage that you read today, and it's really heartbreaking to hear. The same reason that got you into the streets is the same reason that got me into the streets, the killing of George Floyd. I wasn't considering Union myself before coming here until that happened. And it made, for me, Union be the only school that I considered because of its strong commitment to social justice. And, but to hear all of these police killings in the passage that you read, and to just think about the support that the Democratic Party continues to give to the police. This past 2022, a $32 billion budget was allotted to increase police forces by 100,000 police officers. If I'm understanding this correctly, the Tommy Tuberville amendment to the $3.5 trillion Democratic budget, that there was a unanimous vote to take away federal funds from local municipalities that take away money from the police. In New York, where $18 billion goes to police, prisons, jails, $6 billion goes to social funding. Your support of Cop City. It is.
Let me correct you.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm going off the news, but I would love to hear. Yeah.
I am not on the record supporting Cop City. I am not. Where did you read that?
All right. There's this quote by Desmond Tutu that to remain silent in the time of adversity is to take the side of the oppressor. And we have not heard a strong denunciation from you or Ebenezer Church about Cop City, and so that feels like tacit support.
Okay, that's a fair question. You ready for me to answer the question?
I would love it, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So thank you very much for the question. I remain as deeply committed to these issues that I describe in my book as I was as a student. In fact, even more so. Because I understand things now that I didn't understand fully then. We tend to focus on the police, and policing has to be addressed. And it felt propitious that 30 days after I announced my run for the Senate, we first encountered COVID-19, and then 60 days later with the killing of George Floyd, the reemergence of what I call COVID-16-19, the reiteration of this old problem of white supremacy that has like any other bad virus, mutated from enslavement to Jim Crow segregation, and then to what Michelle Alexander rightly calls the new Jim Crow. Which is why I was so moved by her book, by the way. I tease her that I promote her book more than my own, because I think the new Jim Crow is such an important text. I'm glad about her association here. So, my work in this area is focused primarily around mass incarceration. Because while police brutality matters, I think the violent escalations that we see on our streets between police and citizens, I think those escalations are as predictable as they are tragic. There's a way in which I don't see them so much as the problem as the consequence of the more fundamental public policy issue. The more fundamental public policy issue is this turn we made around 1980 towards mass incarceration, so that the land of the free is by far the mass incarceration capital of the world. 4% of the world's population warehouses 25% of the world's prisoners, 25%. No other country, even the regimes whose human rights records we love to deplore, they don't even come close. We got more people in prison in America than they do in China, a repressive regime with 1 billion people. So here's my position. When we could have responded to the economic reality of a post-industrial economy, and we could have invested in getting people ready for that, for the service and information age, could have invested in vocational training, technical schools. All that stuff got called poor, and we invested for generations, decades, politicians, as you point out, on the right and the left, Democrats and Republicans, in building this massive carceral state. My position is, the reason I say those escalations and deaths are as predictable as they are tragic is, if you got a dog that big, it's got to eat. And that beast eats black and brown bodies. So even among the folks who are focused on police brutality, I don't think we're talking enough about the carceral state, because there's more than one way to die. You can die a physical death on the street. You can also die what Orlando Patterson calls a social death. So that even if you circulate through the system for 60 days, take a plea, like a lot of black and brown kids do, and say, you want to just go away, just take a plea, and then they've got a record. Years later, they still have a record. And all of the discriminations against which Dr. King fought generations ago are legal. Employment discrimination legal, housing discrimination legal, can't get benefits, can't vote. We know what the outcomes of which we know. You're going to go back. So as a pastor, as an activist, as a senator, as a father, and as the brother, of a man, my older brother, who spent 22 years in prison for a nonviolent, drug-related offense, first-time offender in America's war on drugs. To be sure, he was a police officer, so there is the color of public corruption, I get it. But for that, he was in a crime in which it was his first time. No one died, no one got hurt, no one even got high. My brother was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The only reason he got out was because of COVID. And he's now at home under house arrest because I guess 25, 26 years isn't enough. So I'm continuing to speak on these issues, to work on them in ways that you may not be aware. My church started an ending mass incarceration movement before I ran. We continue to do that work. And I am looking at the issue of Cop City. I've got a conversation with the mayor coming up in a few days. But it's not a simple thing. Now, there may be folk in this room, and I respect, because I'm, look, this is a wonderful thing about Union. Maybe there are people in this room who don't think, police are needed at all. There might be. Okay. As a theologian who has a robust, semi-Augustinian view of sin, or human, I think we need police officers. And they need to be trained somewhere, somehow. The question is, what kind of training are they going to get? So I'm engaged on the issue, even though it's a local issue. Whether Cop City is going to happen or not is not a decision that I get to make. I work at the federal level. But I am engaged. And more importantly, I'm focused not just on the police, but what I see is the larger, more foundational issue, which is mass incarceration. And I'm still waiting on the Christian church. I think our silence on the question of mass incarceration, Dale, I think is tantamount to being silent in response to abolition or segregation. And I'm still wondering why the church hasn't found the kind of moral indignation to respond to that issue with the same urgency. So you and I may not agree on everything, but I share the passion, the sense of urgency and commitment.
Senator Warnock says in the first chapter of his book, America's story has always been complicated. And on behalf of this community, we want to thank you for your time, for your grace, for your passion, and for being able to share with us tonight. Come on, family, put your hands together for the good senator. Thank you all for coming tonight. We greatly appreciate your questions and greatly appreciate your attention. And I'll turn over to Paula now as we close on out.